Welcome to the Taos Institute's Relational Research Network video series. In this series, we explore research from a relational perspective. We hear from people working with a relational research process and learn about related values, concepts, and practices. To start, here are some of our ideas. Research from a relational perspective embodies a philosophical and co-creative stance. It is thus not a method, per se, but rather a collaborative way of being. Engaging from this perspective entails an ethical responsiveness to a focus of inquiry. Recognizing that reality is created through language and social structures means it can also be recreated. Relational research is a process that is attentive to broader relations and interactions. The purpose is to expand possibilities and co-create transformative potentials. We hope you enjoy the series and invite you to join in the conversation. Bill Randall, a conversation with Tahara Barati. Relational research as personal connection. Bill Randall is professor of Gerontology at St. Thomas University in New Brunswick, Canada. Bill has helped to pioneer a unique approach to the study of aging known as narrative gerontology. Among his more recent research interests are narrative resilience in later life and narrative care in promoting emotional well-being among older adults.
If you're okay, so I'm going to start with you introducing yourself, situate yourself geographically, professionally, and also socially.
Okay. Well, I'm from New Brunswick, Canada. My name is Bill Randall, and I'm a professor of gerontology at St. Thomas University, which is a small liberal arts institution in Fredericton, New Brunswick. I've been here since 1995, but I'm also a native of New Brunswick. I grew up in a rural community not far from Fredericton. With colleagues here and there, locally and around the world, in fact, I've been developing a particular interest in what we call narrative gerontology, which put simply is the study of the biographical or autobiographical dimensions to the aging process and how we age and change over time in terms of our stories and how those stories and our lives intersect and interact. So and I'm particularly interested in something called narrative care, which I think has a kind of a relevance to maybe relational research. I can say more about that. So I'm also semi-retired. I'm on a 4-year tapering off retirement trajectory. Year 3 of the 4 years. And so by the end of the academic year 21-22, I will be completely retired and wondering what's next. So that's in a nutshell, that's kind of who I am, where I am, and so forth. I'm single. I presently involved with somebody. I don't have any children of my own, although I do have a son through the Big Brothers Big Sisters organization, and we're still in contact. Have been for 20 years. I have a mom who's 99 and still living quite successfully, I guess you could say, in a retirement home, and I have 2 sisters, one of whom lives in Fredericton with her partner, and the other lives in Virginia. So that gives you a roundabout picture, I think, hopefully.
Yes, thank you so much. Yes, thank you. I got a full picture of you and among all the relationships that you are interacting with. So I'm wondering if you could talk a little bit about relational research, what it means to you, how you define it.
Well, it's not a term that I've actually used until you reached out to me. But funnily enough, I had an occasion last week to read a manuscript, a book manuscript by a colleague of mine in the United States, who is a very well-regarded narrative psychologist. And he had written a book about his mother, basically, and his relationship with his mother, who he was very close to during the years of her life, her final years of her life, as she was fading away with dementia. And he used that phrase quite explicitly in the beginning of his book, that this is a forum, he says, of relational research. he was researching his mother's journey, but also his journey with his mother and the various nuances and subtleties and complexities of her situation, their relationship, what it meant to him, what it means to him. So that was an interesting coincidence, and it made me realize that in many respects, the research that I've been doing, and I don't really consider myself as a researcher. I'm more of a writer, I guess, but my research has been about relationships in many respects. I was part of if I could make this digression, I think it's relevant. I was part of a research project where we were interviewing people 80 years old and over about the stories of their lives. And there were 3 of us conducting the interviews. So we each interviewed 10 different older adult people. But when we began analyzing the interview data and the transcripts and so forth, we realized that each of the 3 of us, were getting different kinds of data, different kinds of responses from our participants. And it forced us to think about the interviewing style that we each had. Because I was interviewing people who are from the same area that I grew up, I immediately had a kind of a connection of sorts that would, in fact, lead me off the path of the interview protocol. And I would say, oh, so you grew up in Sussex. Okay, would you have known so-and-so? You know, because there's that, the Maritimes has that kind of, who do you know? Where's your family from? It's that kind of more intimate network of relationships, I think, than you find in other parts of the world or in other parts of Canada even. But anyway, so we wrote an article, the 3 of us, how listeners shape what tellers tell. And it really got us into the whole question of the co-narration that can happen in a research interview, in a therapeutic exchange between the client and the clinician, etc., and really opened up some exciting possibilities. So that's the other thing, finally, and I don't want to go on too much about this, but I'm currently wrapping up a research project. Actually, it's going to be a book with U of T Press, where the team that I'm involved with, we've been sort of poring over the interview data, interviews with older adults who end up talking about important things in their lives, precious objects, whether it's an item of clothing or a photograph or something that they've held on to for 50, 60, 70 years. And even though we on the research team didn't actually conduct the interviews, we had one person do the interviews, we each identified with a particular participant. For example, I identified very closely with one participant who was from Germany and who had been was going to be a priest at one point in his life and had a very meandering path, and for whom learning is the sort of the same as spirituality. And I realized that I had a lot in common with that particular participant. So I wanted to write one of my chapters about that participant, and I needed to come clean at the beginning of the chapter, the many ways in which my story, I see his story through the lens of my own story, if you will, okay? And of course, in the field of autoethnographic research, which you know more about than I do, that interface between the story of the participant in the research project, the story of the interviewer or the analyzer of the data, and the story that develops between the two, muddies the waters if you think of research as an objective, unbiased kind of process. But if you get rid of that idea and you see that research is about search, it's about in search as much as research, then anyway, I think I've realized that I'm probably an autoethnographic researcher more than I am anything. I don't know if that gives you a bit of.
Absolutely. That's very beautiful, because I could hear how you are, when you're writing, when you're doing research, or you're talking to other people's, you're kind of looking for threads that somehow see your story through their eyes and their stories through yours. And it's kind of a shift of positioning. It's not just, you're just telling your side or just focusing on what you want. You're looking for that shift. How does that manifests itself, this way of looking at people's story?
I teach a course. It's a good question. There's lots in that. I teach a course every year and have done so for 25 years called Narrative Gerontology.
Mm-hmm.
And the students, it's an elective course, it's not required. Gerontology in general puts a lot of emphasis on what I call the bad news about the aging process, the things that go wrong and need to be fixed or solved or whatever. Whereas narrative gerontology takes a very different starting point, which is that we human beings are interpreting beings. We make meaning. And one of the main ways that we make meaning is by telling and retelling ourselves and others' stories about our lives. So I start with that, and my aim is to help the students appreciate that every encounter they have with an older adult is an opportunity for them to honor and to connect in some way with the story of that individual. Every life has a story. Sometimes as we get older, the story in terms of which we understand our identity is so seldom invited or elicited by others who may be busy with attending to the tasks of caring for us, that our story kind of dries up inside of us. I call that narrative atrophy. So I encourage my students that every time you have a chance to say, Mrs. Jones or Mrs. Barati or Mr. Smith or whatever, tell me a little bit about yourself. And you can have those kinds of conversations while you're doing the tasks that need to be done, helping the person get to the bathroom, to the meal, or whatever.
Mm-hmm.
My mother, if I could give you a case in point, my mother's 99. She lives in one of these facilities, and she's aging very gracefully, I feel. But she has a special connection with so many of the staff members who help her with her daily activities. And I think they're learning how to exercise narrative care by interacting with my mother, because they ask her, so how's your son and how's your daughter doing? And they kind of connect with her, not just as a patient who needs specific things done to her,
Mm-hmm.
but as a person who has a story, who has a full life. Yes, she can't go to the bathroom easily by herself. Yes, she can't walk, around the block 47 times by herself. But she's got a story, and her story is central to her sense of identity. So the young staff members, I think, are learning to hook in to that story world, as I call it, and that charms mother. It warms her heart, and she will call me. Teresa was in today, or Megan was in today to make my bed, and she's so sweet, and we had the nicest little chat. That's kind of a sappy maybe example, but that's narrative care. If I could give you another example from my father, who died at 98. He was a Protestant minister for most of his adult life. And even after he retired from that, he still had those pastoral instincts, okay? And there was a time when he said to me, Bill, your mother and I, we should take a tour of a local nursing home, because that's probably where we're going to end up next. We want to have some say in the matter. Fine. So I organized a tour for them to go see this nursing home that I'm very familiar with, and it's recently been refurbished. My friend Ken, who's the executive director, he was showing them around. We were walking along. Dad was on his cane. Mother was kind of following behind, skeptical about the idea of moving to a nursing home at all. But Dad was trying to think ahead and be proactive. So he's walking along with his cane. Ken, the director, is saying, well, we have a new area over here. And we've changed the bedroom, so everybody has their own personal bedroom. It looked really nice. But as we were going along, there was this, I have to say, little old lady, because that's what she, in a sense was, the archetypal little old lady sitting in a wheelchair, slumped over like that, facing the wall. And I'm thinking to myself, probably Ken would have, if he'd known this woman was going to be here, he would have had her moved away somewhere, because it was interfering with the sales pitch he was trying to do. But anyway, my dad saw this woman, saw the name tag on the back of her wheelchair, and he recognized that family name. So Dad, who also was on a cane, leaning on a cane, he kind of scrunched around and looked her straight in the eye, and he said, so I see that your name is Mrs. Culloden. Yes, it is.
Yeah.
You wouldn't be from up around Stanley, would you? Stanley was a small community where Dad used to serve a little church. Well, yes, I am. And for a couple of minutes, they had an exchange. It wasn't particularly profound, but I thought to myself afterwards, it meant a lot to Dad to be able to connect with that person, not just as a body slumped in a wheelchair, but as a real person with a full life, full story, full history behind her, a community and a family that she was connected with, but maybe had become detached from. So in that instant, when she kind of brightened right up, she felt that kind of surge of, hey, I am somebody. I do have a life. I am a person. I've lived a life. And I like to think that she slept better that night, ate a better meal, and just generally kind of felt
I think
renewed.
so.
Yeah. So I use that in some of my classes and presentations as a very corny but real example of narrative care, which is making that connection, establishing that relationship. And I used to be a minister myself for 10 years, and I realized in retrospect, Tahara, that was probably a huge part of what my work involved, is to try to make a connection with each of the parishioners. And it could be anything. Maybe they were totally different from me in a lot of respects, but on the wall of their living room was a picture of Paris. And I went to Paris once. So I could say, well, so were you in Paris? Yes. Well, Ralph and I, before he passed away, we went there for a holiday. So there's a little connection. There's a little relationship that starts. And you kind of work with that and you kind of fan that as if it were a little flame. Anyway,
yeah. No, those are beautiful stories that you're talking about, and it's a real life event, right? People connecting with one another in a very humanistic way, in a way that that it resonates with them, and they could talk and share their life story with each other. Right? So I get a sense that relational research to you is a lot to do with that, making those personal connection with one another, and starting from any symbols, anything, any picture, any line of inquiry could actually connect people together and have dialogue with each other.
Yeah, I never did have skills in any other kind of research. I don't know anything about quantitative research. I don't know anything about, questionnaires and things like that. I respect the data that you get from those, but I have no facility, no ability in that kind of research. So when I realized that there was something like autoethnographic research, or now what you have as relational research, that resonates with me. Like, okay, if I'm a researcher, that's the kind of research I guess I do.
So I'm wondering about the impact of this way of work or this way of thinking on your relationship with your students. How does that come about? How do you see yourself connecting with them? Because the teachers, the students are power relations there, and a lot of other barriers to connect them. So how does that manifest for you?
That's a good question. I think that's the key for me of being a teacher, is to make a connection with every individual student, if at all possible. Now, sometimes when you have a class of 60 students, which at this point in my career, I don't anymore, thank goodness, it's hard when you have a large number, or 60 or 100 or whatever. Our university keeps class size pretty small, typically. And this semester, my first semester teaching a full semester in COVID times, has been totally in an online way. So I've had to, record my lectures in advance and get everything all set up in an online way, asynchronously. And I really haven't been able to figure out how to have all the students together at the same time on the screen like this, because the students have other jobs, they're going here, they're going there. But I have found, Tara, this semester, that I've been holding sort of office hours, okay? Sometimes actually in an office where you sit, 6 feet apart kind of thing, and one or two students might drop by, and we have fantastic conversations, one-on-one. And then more than that, I've had a lot of Skype or Teams, Zoom kinds of conversations, one-on-one with students. And I find that because I'm an older professor, I just turned 70. So I don't really care a lot at this point about, scoring high in terms of student evaluations for my course and my teaching, because I'm past all that. What it is for me now is connecting with the students and finding out about them personally. and, learning a bit about their stories and sharing a bit about my stories, because in a course on narrative gerontology, I'm trying to walk the talk. That's what it's about, narratively caring for one another. So yeah, there is a power imbalance, no question. And I'm the one who ultimately decides whether they get an A, B, C, D, or F. But I've had students say to me this semester that they've said, I've taken 5 other courses, but this is the one I enjoy the most. And they're not saying that because it's an easy peasy course, because I have lots of reading for them to do, but because it allows them to explore themselves. And not just to think about older adults and older adult stories, but their own stories, that even though they're 20 or 22, they are in the middle of the story that they themselves are living. And they're the author, the editor, the character, the whatever, in the midst of their own story. And they seem to find that a kind of a liberating perspective. So if I can, my father liked to sing old hymns from the Christian tradition, which is our background. And there's one old hymn that I consciously think of. It's funny. I visited in Atlanta a few years ago, and I went to the Civil Rights Museum, and they have a special room in the Civil Rights Museum devoted to Martin Luther King Jr. And so I went in there, and I noticed underneath this glass showcase or whatever, there was a handwritten copy in his handwriting of this old hymn, and it goes like this: If I can help somebody as I travel along, if I can cheer somebody with a word or song, then my living will not be in vain. And I think of that sort of thing. That's at this point in my life, it's kind of like a Parker Palmer sort of thing. If I can make a difference in the lives of these students who are struggling like crazy to some of them are far away from home. They haven't seen their family since pre-COVID. They're financially hurting. They've got courses that they happen to take, all of them online. They're stressed like crazy. They're socially isolated. If I can, in my interactions with them, make some sort of small positive difference. I know that sounds a bit sappy, but to me, that's teaching at its best, maybe. I don't know if there's a new age kind of thinker called Gary Zukav. He wrote a book called Soul Stories, and he writes about the importance of us blessing everybody that we interact with every day. Blessing not in the religious sense necessarily, but in that kind of human to human, because you can always find something in everybody you deal with, whether it's somebody that you're getting your coffee from at Tim Hortons, or the taxi driver, or the person who cleans the office, or a colleague, or whatever. You always find something that you can say, hey, I really like that. Thanks for just saying that. That sends a ripple effect through their lives. It doubles back into your life. It's a win-win kind of scenario. Sorry, I'm getting kind of emotional here, but.
Oh, that's fine. That's emotion is part of our narrative as well. This is what it is. It's a real life experience. We are talking. None of this is pre-script. And I think that's again is part of relational research, that two people join together in conversation without any predisposition or preparation in advance. So no, I totally connect with what you're saying in terms of the impact and in terms of the relationship that you have with your students, and how you try to make a difference, particularly within the time that it's so difficult to go through it.
And they make a difference in my life too.
Yeah, I was wondering about. Yeah,
I was thinking about that the other day. I've got a lot of great friends in my life, but I have a lot of students and former students who I don't get to see them that often. But when we do connect, it's like friends, old friends,
Yeah.
We've been through stuff together. We've been on a curriculum together, and we've had good conversations about ideas, but also about life. And yeah, I mean, there's that line from the writer Maya Angelou, It says somewhere that people will forget what it is you said. They'll forget what it is you did. But they may not forget how you made them feel.
That's right. Yeah.
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 Well, in your work, you live that all the time, I'm sure.
What we feel in it during the conversation, how they feel about the conversation, it's similar, because we are impacting each other, believe it or not.
Yeah, we are.
Yeah.
We are. I mean, it's the interconnected universe. Everything is connected, from the tiniest little subatomic particle to the biggest galaxy. We're all interconnected. I believe that more and more and more. And maybe that's just me aging. Maybe that's part of the aging process. Thomas More, the author of Care of the Soul, talks about aging nudges us into attention to the spiritual aspects of life, spiritual broadly defined. And I think that realizing the interconnectedness of all. My father was a great fan of family genealogy. And I think that when people explore a family genealogy, and sometimes it's an interest they develop later in life, it's a way of realizing their connectedness to the past and their connectedness to the generations that follow. And for Dad, it was a spiritual quest almost. Oh, did you know that way back in the 18th century? I'm starting to feel that way myself, but he definitely had that bug, that genealogical bug, and I think that's a form of. And there's one other gerontology person that I think might be interesting to put into this conversation. His name is Lars Tornstam. He was a Swedish gerontologist. He's since passed away, and he came up with a theory called gerotranscendence. And his observation was, with people very late in life, there's a transcending of a lot of different boundaries that otherwise define our lives. So the boundary between self and other gets a little bit fuzzied. And I see this with my mother, who has so many people that she's linked to and cares about. The line between the past, the present, and the future gets a little fuzzy. You live more maybe in the now. And then lastly, the line between life and death isn't quite so, death is maybe viewed more and more instinctively as a transition than it is the termination. So that's that's an expression of connectedness too, on a theoretical level.
Yeah. No, as you were talking, I was thinking, how connection actually makes time and space melt. All the divisions that we created arbitrarily, to make our life easier, but somehow it's working against us. So I'm wondering if more professionals, step into this relational research as a connection making territory, as a way of relating to each other and sharing its stories and narratives. What are your hopes for the future of research, or as we are moving towards this and trying to make these ideas, spread out and be more accessible to everyone?
Yeah, good question to ask me kind of at the end of my academic career. Maybe I'll have another academic career, I don't know, but I teach, this should be noted that I teach in a liberal arts university, small undergraduate. We don't have any graduate programs. We don't have any engineering programs or chemistry programs. We have, literature and philosophy and history and gerontology. So the study of gerontology at our university is in a liberal arts context. In most other universities, like University of Toronto, where I have a connection, or other universities, gerontology would be tucked up under either the social work department, which is okay, or the geriatric medicine department. And so I'm concerned that in our field of gerontology, we are so motivated by and guided by the biomedical model that we're in danger of losing the soulful, insightful dimensions of aging and so forth. But anyway, that's a sidetrack. So I
that's
think
a good point, though. That's a very good point, because that's a dominant narrative now, right? So we're trying to, bring forward other ways of, doing things that it's more constructive and connecting.
Yeah. And, you know, the biomedical model, like a lot of scientific classicals, is kind of, you murder to dissect. You chop things down into smaller things, as opposed to seeing the interconnectedness of it all. And a narrative approach, I think, helps a person to see that all the parts of your being are work together. You know, we're holistic creatures.
Yeah.
So I would want my students, if I continue to have students, to go out into their practice as gerontologists with firmly convinced of the whole side of each person that they deal with, and not to break them down into a bunch of separate medical conditions and so forth. I know I have friends who are geriatricians and geriatric nurses, and it's not as cut and dry by any means, but you go into a hospital, and if you're familiar with, there's Jerome Bruner made a distinction between two types of thinking. He said there's the logical, paradigmatic thinking, and then there's narrative thinking, he said. And, you know, logical thinking is what fuels engineering and chemistry and the sciences for the most part, and it's all well and good. But it tends to be the kind of thinking that dominates maybe in hospitals. So that nurses, however well-intentioned they may be, have to be so focused on the test results and the quantity of blood and whatever and so forth, that the patients inevitably get looked upon in a sense as statistical problems or as medical, you know, not
another number.
Another number, yeah. The gallbladder in room 1203 sort of thing. So I'm fortunate. Next month, I'm going to speak to a first-year class of nursing students here at the University of New Brunswick. I've been invited to speak about narrative care, nursing as narrative care. And I'll be focusing on older adults. And it's my chance to seed in their minds as first-year nursing students this image of their patients as people, as persons with stories, who, yes, their bodies are not working that well, and sometimes their body's ailments are linked to their story ailments. Biography and biology are linked.
Absolutely.
Yeah. So that would be in my small little corner of the world. If I can help somebody to see that kind of a whole picture. I don't know where other researchers are moving in the research that they do, because the only researchers I interact with are liberal arts types of researchers, and they tend to do a lot of qualitative research, which I think is implicitly a relational.
Absolutely. Yeah.
You know, thing.
Yeah. Moving towards the qualitative research and seeing a person as a person, right? As a whole, as a being. And also through interactions, we become that whole, right? So because we are all pieces of a bigger puzzle. And if we don't make those interactions, we are not going to see the full perspective as we go along. Yeah.
And to appreciate how you, as an interviewer in a qualitative research project, that your own story is being affected and touched, and
absolutely,
and then you come away from those interviews changed, perhaps yourself. And if you don't, maybe there's something wrong.
Absolutely, yeah.
I'm sure in your work as therapist, every client, every new client, it expands, deepens you in your story and so forth.
Yes, yeah, we are co-participating, right? And also co-researching each other's lives and mutually contributing to our lives without even sometimes noticing. But we do need to highlight that mutual contribution, because nothing is one way. It's always been bi-directional.
Yeah. Wow, this is exciting territory that you are moving into with your research, and it's by putting a name on it as relational research, it gives it an added sort of dignity and identity, and makes us sit up and take notice.
Yeah. The most important part of it is relational, right? The relationships that we are in order to do research. Yeah. Not doing research, to make sense of what people are doing. So it's kind of changing the focus.
I was very pleased a few years ago, after having met Ken and Mary, to receive a copy of Ken's book, Relational Being.
Yes, yes,
You know,
yeah.
which I can imagine, is a important source book for this way of thinking.
Absolutely.
His colleague Mark Freeman, whom I mentioned to you earlier, who's written a book about his relationship with his mother, he has edited a book called The Priority of the Other. And I'm sure that he and
Yes.
Ken have had many conversations about, because they're both involved with APA and the Qualitative Research division, I think. Our whole, we've over the years, we've had a number of conferences called Narrative Matters every 2 years since 2002. We started them here at our university. And Ken and Mary were keynote speakers. They came to Fredericton here in 2010 and were keynote speakers. They did a dual thing as a keynote. So did Ruth Ellen Josselson. She was also a keynote speaker. But I got to have breakfast with the two of them. And you said you have your Ken and Mary story as well.
Absolutely.
And that's I still think so fondly. They were so gracious and humble.
Yes.
They were, we are the great Ken and Mary Gergen. It was, hi, Bill, how are you?
Yes. Yeah. Again, connecting, as a human being, one-on-one, making those personal connections, no matter who you are or, what socially defines you. So somehow being a human being in interactions is what we are aiming for. And I hope we would be able to continue their legacy, to bring forward those ideas to the world. I want to appreciate you for, being available and also accepting my invitation to come to this conversation. It was very joyful to talk to you, and I hope that we continue our connection in another forum.
Yes.
So
wonderful to chat with you, and I'm sorry I went on and on and on, but very important work that you're doing and inquiry that you're making, and it's set my mind thinking about a lot of things. So thank you for that.
Beautiful. Thank you.
Okay. All right.
Thank you to Bill Randall and Tahera Berati. More about Bill at www.taosinstitute.net/William-Randall. Please join in the conversation. What captured your attention in this video? How do you think these ideas reflect a relational orientation to research? Please leave a comment on this YouTube page or join our community at www.taosinstitute.net/relational-research-network. There you can find a lot more information and resources. We thank the Relational Research Network leadership team for the vision and dedication to making this video series come to life.